Hey folks, welcome back. The black flies are out in full swing. I'm on the move here today. I also don't want to stand underneath trees like this. I am out here in the red pine forest, and if you've been following the channel for the last little while, sometime around the end of March we had a really big ice storm hit, and unfortunately for me, it pretty much destroyed a big portion of my red pine forest. And so I'm out here today doing a little bit of an update, but also a cleanup. Now the forest, I have been working at it. It has been a slow go. I'm pulled in all kinds of different ways for all kinds of other responsibilities, and as a result I don't get around to this every single day. But this is what we're left with through much of the forest, and it's kind of a mess. As you can see in there, a lot of the trees broke off, and the trouble is they not only broke off, they sort of intertwined with each other, and the ones that didn't break off fully, they got hung up nice and high. And that's a bit of a dangerous situation, as you can imagine. So this part of the forest goes down that way, and if you look sort of way through the trees over there, there's a huge spot way over there. You haven't seen a ton of footage of that, but that is probably the biggest area over there. But this right here, this is just to give you a bit of context, because we're going to go back where we just were walking from, because I have done a little bit of chainsaw work, and I've also done a little bit right here. You can see what I've done. It may not look like much, but I've more or less taken trees that looked like that, and the ones that I could handle, I cut them down to the ground, and then I cut the stump flush so I can drive in there. Obviously the logs have to be out of the way. I've also topped some of the trees, so a lot of the stuff here that I could access is just the tops. And so I've got some logs to move around today, and that's why we're headed back this direction. So this area here is where I've done the majority of the chainsaw work, and more or less what I've been doing is just cutting trees to the ground that I can access. Now a lot of trees I couldn't access for whatever reason, whether they're up too high and they're kind of sketchy, or they're tangled mess like that. But a big area in here I was able to cut down, and I tried to cut the stumps as low as I could as well. And so now we're left with a whole bunch of logs that I've also cut a bunch of the tops off of that are ready to be moved. One of the challenges I'm having right now with this general cleanup, aside from the scale of it, this cleanup job is massive, but is also having room to work. If you have a look around, the canopy is wide open now. In fact, it's wide open right to the sawmill, but I have nowhere to work. So today we're going to move some of these logs out of the way. I've got the bomba light there, I've got some forks on it, and I've got the tractor with the forestry grapple and another grapple on the front. Also got the Mini X over there, so we'll get these put into action. I'm not quite sure exactly what we're going to do, but I think we're just going to create a big pile of logs. That way I have an open area to work, and then I could go ahead and sort the logs into piles. Saw logs, firewood, and well, maybe corduroy road logs. My goal is to get a clear swath right through to the sawmill, and so all these pieces you see broke off up high, I'm going to get those cut down as well, once I get the logs moved away from them, so I can get some access with the chainsaw. Now if you look in here, some of the trees I couldn't even cut. They're just too much of a hazard. See them up high there? You can't be cutting underneath of it if something's hanging over your head. You never know what can happen. So we'll get things cleared away. I'll use some of the equipment to help that get down, and we'll be on our way. Well, as they say, things are gonna look worse before they look better, and the black flies are certainly holding true to that. But in terms of the forest, I'd say we're making progress. We started with pretty much a mixed match of stuff like you see over there, and then we ended up with a bit of a clearing here. Now I have these big piles here on either side, and this is going to be a job just processing this. But I had to make these piles so I could get an opening here. And I need this opening so that as I get more logs from other areas, keep in mind I've got logs all down there and then up there, and on my left here you can sort of see there's logs there, and then even further. I need an area that I can bring them to and actually work on them. Cut them to length, you know, top them if necessary, and then get them to the sawmill to make some lumber. Now I'm not always going to be mixing in all the tops and the smaller logs with the bigger saw logs. I'm going to leave those smaller ones out in the woods for now. My primary goal is to get the saw logs over here so I can try to salvage as much as possible. When I was in here cutting the damaged trees down to the ground, I was cutting flush with the ground, but because this was a forest that looked like that essentially, there's never been heavy equipment in here, and well, because of that, things got compacted as I drove over it, and those stumps, which were smooth to drive over the first few times, quickly became a bit of a pain. So I'm going to get in here and get these cut down. I'll probably use the stump grinder so I don't dull my chain on every stump. Now because all the stumps are so numerous here, I decided just to leave the Bommalite up there. It's a track machine, and if you know anything about track machine, it does a bit of a seesaw if you go over stumps, and I certainly don't want to be ramming into them by accident. There's not a lot of space between stumps, and so the tractor was a bit easier. I could just crawl over them if necessary. Now on that point about crawling, I was definitely going slow here today. I was utilizing that grapple on the back as well as on the front, and that turned out to be a good combo. The one on the back was really pulling the trees nicely. It gets a good bite with the rear tires, especially when there's weight on them, and that pulls things nicely. And then that front grapple on the loader allows me to push things back nice and high. Now just at the end there, you would have seen me using the portable winch, and I like to carry that around. I keep it out here at the sawmill in the woods because from time to time you get situations like those trees that were right near the saw shed. And although I like to consider myself good at sawing, knock on wood, there will be a time where you're not good and you don't want it to fall on the saw shed. That saw shed's been through a lot lately. If you can imagine, I've probably pulled a good 6 or 7 trees off it after the ice storm. That's why the tin looks so rough up there. And so I don't want to be hitting it again. That's why you get that portable winch out, and it'll hold the tension. And I'm not talking a ton of tension, just a little bit, but it holds the tension. So when I go and cut, it actually will help the tree fall this way. Now, if necessary, if the tree was leaning back towards the saw shed, I could come back up to the winch and pull on it, and it would guide it back towards this way. As things progress out here in the woods, including the seasons, I look out towards the forest and I get a little bit overwhelmed at times. You can imagine this seems like a daunting task, and you look every which way and there's more of it. I start to just realize that I got to take things one day at a time. If I don't, then what'll happen is you'll just give up. You'll quit doing this, and you'll just leave the trees out in the woods because it seems like it's an impossible job. I don't think it's impossible. You won't be able to save them all, as they say, but we'll certainly save some, and we'll have a good time doing it. Just keep the bug spray handy. You're going to need it. Anyways, that's going to do it for me here today. I hope to be back out in the tractor real soon. We'll get those stumps ground down, and then we'll be back to sawing. Hopefully one day, and I hope it's not 10 years from now, the forest looks like it once did, at least free of debris. It'll never look like it once did. That was full of trees, but such is life. You play the cards you're dealt. That's it, that's all. Do me that big favor. If you'd like this video, give it the old like-a-roo. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'm heading back to the tractor. See you next time.